Well, welcome back. So we transition from trade to life sciences innovation, strategic policies for emerging ecosystems. And what we want to do on this panel is talk about how Latin American nations, and Argentina in particular, can develop more innovative life sciences innovation ecosystems, and how intellectual property, robust rules and laws play an important role in that regard. Argentina's life sciences industry has now 350 biopharma companies that produce 3.75 billion in innovative drugs and therapies every year, supporting 20,000 Argentinians and delivering nearly $500 million of exports. But we know that that is not large enough for Argentina, and we know that in the life sciences, as in other sectors, the world is not producing as much innovation as is possible or as is needed. So policymakers have a critical role to get this right. Our discussants today will be Cairo Jennings. He is the intellectual property attaché for Mercosur, based in Rio de Janeiro, where he serves as the primary U.S. officer on IP protection and enforcement issues in Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, and in Venezuela. Maria Vasquez serves as Dean of the Law School at the Universidad de San Andres in Buenos Aires, where she directs the WIPO Joint Master Program in Intellectual Property and Innovation. She completed her law degree at Harvard Law School and is a globally recognized expert on intellectual property law issues. Monica Melo Guerrero is Vice Chancellor of Research at Instituto OMG, a Dominican Republic-based think tank. She has over 30 years of experience in project management and has a degree in business law from Pulcum University. Last but not least, Mark Schultz is the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company Chair in Intellectual Property Law and Director of the Intellectual Property Program at the University of Akron Law School. He is also a Senior Fellow at the Geneva Network, a UK-based think tank focused on international IP and health policy. So the approach for this panel is going to be 5 minutes of opening remarks from our panelists. Then we'll have some moderator and then audience Q&A. Cairo, may I turn it over to you?
Well, thanks, Stephen, very much for the invitation. It's wonderful to be here. It's a privilege to be here in Argentina, my first time in this beautiful country. Very happy to be here. I'm with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. We have a program of IP attachés throughout the world, and I'm privileged to cover the Mercosur market, sitting in Rio de Janeiro, but covering Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay, and Venezuela. I'm joined by some of my IP specialists in the back. Pame's here in Buenos Aires, Bia is in Rio with me, and our econ officer from the U.S. Embassy is here as well. So privileged to have my colleagues with me. I thought I'd start with an anecdote. That's always a good thing to do. Last night, I was riding through the streets of Montevideo. I was being driven, and I had a car full of Uruguayans and Argentinians, and they were kind of fighting with each other about a topic. They were arguing. And you might think it was quite passionate. There was a lot of disagreement. You might think, is this religion? No, they weren't talking about religion. Politics, certainly not. Football, no. I have a Brazilian and a Argentinian staff. We are not allowed to talk about football at work. But no, they were arguing about who has the best dulce de leche. Like, I admire so much the competitive spirit in this region. And from the U.S. perspective, what we want to do is help the governments in the region channel that wonderful resource, that competitive spirit for innovation. And, in our DNA as a country, we view that primarily as assigning strong property rights to innovation. It's in our Constitution, our founding document, ratified in 1788. It's Article 1. Section 8, Clause 8, you can look it up, but we actually have a constitutional role in providing strong property rights for innovations, and that's what we do. So when I think about innovation, kind of stepping back in the region, we're talking about R&D, and why is, for example, a U.S. company going to make investments on the ground? If you're talking about life sciences, you're talking about a very long pipeline. For some of these innovations, it can take 25 years. I was talking just the other day to an innovative pharmaceutical company from the US, and they were talking about this miracle drug that they had developed, and it was close to 30 years. It was 28 years of development and tens and tens of millions of dollars. So you're not going to make those long-term investments unless you can be assured that your investment's going to pay off. And in these long development cycles, the payoff is usually towards the very end. So when we're looking at IP policies that we want to support in the region, we look at patents and trade secrets. On the patent side, we want ease of filing. So we look at all the different WIPO treaties. I'm thinking of the Patent Cooperation Treaty that allows applicants to file in multiple jurisdictions, to drop down, to have one translation, just to have an ease of entering the market. That's one piece. Once you've actually filed, you know, do you have a hope and a prayer of getting protection? And so there we look at patentability criteria. Is it so restrictive that you don't even want to make the investment? And even if you have good criteria and you think you have a hope of getting the patent, what does the actual examination process look like? How delayed is it? Is there a very long backlog? And if there is a very long backlog, are there policies in place to ameliorate that problem? Because as I said in the innovation pipeline, it's at the very end that you get your return. So do you have patent term extension, patent term adjustment that can help companies to get back those investments? So that's kind of the patent side. Now moving to trade secrets, there's a lot of data that you have to submit to the regulatory authorities to get market approval. I'm talking about clinical trials and all sorts of information about biosimilars. Is that being protected from unfair use? And there we're talking about regulatory data protection. So kind of the overview of things that are important to us. If you step back even further, I would say that there's always the fear of compulsory licensing. We want to make sure that any licensing that happens, we default to VMAT, voluntary and mutually agreed terms. So those are kind of the big picture issues. I know Maria's going to talk about some of the issues in Argentina. We can talk about specific policy changes, but from the U.S. perspective, that's what we're looking at. And my goal at the end of my term, I'll be here hopefully for 5 years, is that the next time I'm riding through the streets of Montevideo, there's an argument about who has the best patent protection in the region. That's what I would like to see.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you to ESEADE and to Stephen Ezell, Mark Schultz for having invited me. It's a real honor to be here. So yes, when we discuss life sciences in Argentina, I immediately start thinking about the vast amount of human capital that we have here, you know, in our country and in a lot of our region. But really, it has to do with world-class biotech scientists, researchers. And so when we see how often we receive at our university the, representatives from WIPO, they talk to us about the Global Index of Innovation, etc. And where we see how Argentina, we could say, underperforms in our life sciences innovation, it is always somewhat surprising, somewhat distressing. And I'd like to take a stab at why it is that we are underperforming. And I do think, of course, as an IP professor, I, of course, look at the issues of IP. And first, I would say that from what, you know, from my experience even, what I see is that there is a sort of weak IP literacy among, let's say, among the population, but also among our researchers, among our scientists. Maybe that is somewhat due to the IP paradigm that we have had in not only in Argentina, but in a lot of Latin America during many years. It was considered that IP perhaps benefited other countries, maybe the countries in the north, the countries who produce more products that have IP protection. Perhaps we were only viewed upon as consumers of those products. Well, that is really not the case today. And I would like to call our attention to something I often talk about, which is evidence. That is a publication that came out several years ago by Darío Kodner and Perrota. It's called Blind Technology Transfer. What it has to do is they have studied publications, that is research that has been published by Argentine scientists at his university, at their university, which is Universidad Nacional de Quilmes. And they have viewed how those projects that have been published and not patented have in fact gone to form parts of patents in other countries, in China, in Europe, in the United States. Why is our country, with that publicly funded research, losing out on those products? Because they are not patented. And when we think about why is it that they are not patented, does it have to do with this IP paradigm? Does it have to do with the fact that our scientists are often rewarded for publications and not for patenting? You know, so is there something that has to be changed there as well? Perhaps it has to do with the fact that patenting is quite expensive, as we are not, as Cairo was just saying, we have not, as a country, signed the PCT, the Patents Cooperation Treaty, which would perhaps lower the costs of patenting for our scientists. So yes, these are things that immediately one comes across when one looks at innovation in life sciences in Argentina. So first of all, IP literacy, it's something that in our university, as we have the privilege to host our WIPO Joint Masters program, and we receive every year young IP professionals from all over the region, and we try to change that paradigm. We try to see, they have to, our students look at patents, look at IP protection as an enabler, not as a barrier. Patents are not barrier. They are enablers in order to accelerate development, innovation, and economic growth in our region. So that is really a principal subject. And then just to sort of end up these first remarks, I would also say that our regulatory framework has to, of course, accompany this, accompany our scientists in being able to patent. So on the one hand, yes, I think accession to PCT would be a wonderful way to start because it really is basic. I'm sure many of you know that most countries in the world have in fact signed the treaty, the PCT treaty. You can see there's a famous map which has the whole world in light blue, except for very singular countries, among which is Argentina, Afghanistan, Iran. Some countries have not yet signed. We would like to see our country as a signatory of this agreement. And then the whole issue of patentability criteria. There is legislation in place, regulations in place that have limited very much the criteria for being able to patent a work in Argentina, an investigation, a product. And as such, what we would like to see is that our country is aligned with our international treaties. TRIPS, for example, Article 27, insofar as non-discrimination of patentable, of the fields in which patents can be registered. So I think I'm going to leave it there for now, but thank you very much for listening.
Great, thanks. Monica.
Hi, thanks, Stephen. Thanks all for being here. And why do I'm here? Well, as a researcher, I'm always looking for the best way of strengthening policies and also the designing of enabling frameworks, in this case of development and innovation. But before that, as a lawyer and a consultant, I was specifically specialized in regulatory markets and in industrial and intellectual property. So I saw from firsthand what was the struggle in my country with that. And we think that the key issue for innovation and sustainability in this case is the importance of the participation and coordination of three fundamental actors: higher education, public education, public sector, and the private sector. Also with a cross-cutting component, the protection of intellectual property, as we all said. In the case of the Dominican Republic, we counted with the proper law, proper regulation according to international standards, and a spectacular governmental efficient office since 2000. But at that time, it wasn't a thing for us to register or to produce or to innovate in that way. At that time, what was important was trademarks, what's important was counterfeiting, Then we turn into some of other kinds of protection of intellectual property. It wasn't until approximately 10 to 15 years that we thought on the importance of the registration, the production of things that can be registered as patents. And that's why there's several points I want to establish here. One is that obviously the design of the enable framework, not about imposing, it's about creating conditions for us to facilitate the experimentation, the innovation. But the role of higher education is very important. In the case of the Dominican Republic, universities not only are available to produce those talent that we require, as you were saying, we request, and we need technicians, we need engineers, we need people prepared and well educated for that. But also, university has the ability to be the neutral space to foster dialogue between the public sector and the private sector. But it's very important, the protection, obviously, of the intellectual property. We will talk about that later. As I said, we have all those really well covered in the Dominican Republic. But the coordination is important because the public sector provides, obviously, the direction, the legal protection, not excessive protection, please. I don't like excessive interfere of the government in anything. But the private sector is essential because it brings dynamism, market knowledge that is crucial for seeing what is needed, what is really needed in my specific country. We said Latin America, but we are all different. Even in the same country, there are a lot of difference between regions. And also financing, because we understand that the private sectors that have the potential to provide innovative ways of financing those projects and not counting only on the government to finance this. And the prevention of over-regularization. In the case of the Dominican Republic, we are now in the interest of promoting innovation and understanding that it's not the same and that innovation is not only technology. That is important. Sometimes we say innovation, everybody is thinking of technology. And Pro Dominicana, that is an official or governmental office, offers a lot of incentives, tax exemptions. And for biomedicine, it's now a target sector promoted in the Dominican Republic. It wasn't before. We proved in the pandemic that we are able to produce very good quality medical devices. There is that vision now, and we also have finally a national strategy on international property and innovation that has produced over 32,000 jobs in medical devices, and that's a lot. Approved new investments for more than $80 million that will generate more than 2,000 new direct jobs. That's very impressive on that area that wasn't before important for us. And medical devices and pharmaceutical cluster promotes that value chain integration. So we have identified strengths and weakness, but I'll let that for later.
Great, thank you. Mark.
Thank you very much. So I'll be sharing insights about life sciences innovation in emerging economies based on work I've done with GTIPA members, ITIF, Geneva Network, and Innovation Council. So there's two key takeaways. First, life science innovation happens everywhere, including in emerging economies. And second, smart policies can enable emerging economies to develop even sophisticated high-end life sciences R&D and biomanufacturing capacity. So, this research we've done was inspired by the intuition that the human mind is the one infinite resource that's evenly distributed throughout the world. And we expect that citizens of emerging economies aren't merely consumers of life sciences inventions from wealthier countries, but they're inventors and entrepreneurs themselves. So even during COVID-19, we saw this principle in action. There were over 370 voluntary manufacturing deals executed globally to share complex vaccine production knowledge, and this advanced technology was shared and importantly deployed globally. Production happened everywhere, and this cooperation happened not despite intellectual property protection, but because of it. IP provided the trust framework that's necessary for voluntary knowledge sharing. So, to show how innovation happens everywhere, I'd like to talk briefly about a project that we worked on with ITIF. This is an ongoing joint project that Stephen Ezell and I started in 2018 among ITIF, Geneva Network, and University of Akron's IP Policy Institute. It's called Innovate for Health. So Innovate for Health profiles entrepreneurs in emerging economies who are solving global health problems with the support of intellectual property. So let's look at these two Argentinian startups. First, Pilar. So Pilar was spun out from the National University of Cordoba. So the research was started there, and it became a commercialized startup. It revolutionizes medication through 3D printing. They print personalized pills for people. Traditional one-size-fits-all medicine doesn't work for everybody. People need different dosing, different combinations, and this patented process prints custom medications at low temperatures with a non-reactive substrate that allows local pharmacies to create personalized drugs and flavored children's medicine using affordable equipment. Now, patent protection was essential. This company describes itself as born from its patent. And the technology transfer assistance it received from the university and local and national agencies that helped it fund its patenting and startup costs were essential to getting started. Another interesting startup here in Argentina is Selectivity Life. They work on the problem of infertility, which affects 1 in 6 people worldwide. So IVF treatments are extremely expensive, between $15,000 and $30,000, and they require complex lab procedures. So Selectivity Life's breakthrough is a solution that allows couples to perform fertility treatments at home, outside of the lab, using a patented device that naturally selects the healthiest sperm. This eliminates expensive clinic visits, makes fertility care accessible to more people, to millions who couldn't afford it before. And this is another case where strong patent protection helped them secure $560,000 US in funding. And they've created this opportunity for millions of couples who were previously excluded from care. Now, these are two really interesting and exciting startups, but there's a fair question if you understand the life sciences sector. You might ask, can emerging economies build higher value biomanufacturing capacity and R&D capacity? And the answer is absolutely yes. From separate research with GTIPA member Innovation Council, we've identified 4 pathways countries can use successfully. All requiring what we call voluntary but not passive approaches, where the government attracts knowledge partners from more developed economies who then do tech transfer through voluntary deals based on incentives and other helpful policies, particularly policies that respect intellectual property. We've done about interviews in 17 countries with policymakers and innovators to determine these pathways. So let's look at the 4 examples. So the first pathway is state-supported strategic partnerships. So Brazil was spending about 30% of its health budget on imported biologic drugs. They created 100 public-private partnerships where foreign companies share knowledge in exchange for guaranteed market access and a share of government procurement. And so Brazil was able to dramatically reduce import dependence while foreign partners gained secure markets, and Brazil started to export biologics. The next example we call backwards integration. So this starts with companies doing more simple parts of the operation, for example, to create vaccines. Simple relative to the other complex steps, but not simple because they require a high degree of competence, regulatory compliance, and they have many steps in and of themselves. So what they were doing in South Africa was fill and finish, which is taking the raw pharmaceutical ingredients and they're putting them into vials. I guess actually the bulk finished product, and putting them into vials, labeling them for distribution, and that in itself is a demanding process. Biovac and Aspen were doing this in South Africa. And the goal was to move up the value chain to more complicated procedures. The government de-risked the partnerships that they needed in order to do that by financing overseas training that upskilled their employees. They provided some tax breaks, and importantly, they provided harmonized and effective regulatory standards that reassured foreign knowledge partners. In the life sciences, it's really important to have a respected regulatory environment, or else your foreign partners won't want to procure drugs or vaccines from you. This has worked for South Africa, and Biovac and Aspen have been able to move up the value chain, to start to move up. Third, in Argentina, we have the phenomenon of leveraging adjacent expertise. So I'm sure, as many in this room know, Argentina has a strong agricultural biotechnology sector. And the things you need to do for agriculture biotech, many of them are similar to what you need to do for creating medical biologics. And so what they did is they built on their strong ag bio sector to develop healthcare biologics capacity, working with European knowledge partners. They used human capital development. The government helped people get educated. There were incentives. And now companies like Mabscience now save Argentina $400 million a year in healthcare costs with local biosimilar production and exports throughout Latin America. Making biosimilars is much harder and much more innovative than making generics. They're much more complex medicines, and Indian companies that make biosimilars are now innovating in their own right, because you essentially have to be an innovator to create a biosimilar. It's such a complex process. Fourth, we looked at systematic R&D expansion. So Indonesia's biopharma grew from a research institute into a major vaccine manufacturer, stage by stage, by working with foreign knowledge partners, first in Japan and then India, to build up their capacity. So success across all of these pathways depends on strong IP protection, giving partners confidence to share technology, government investment in training and infrastructure, and creating win-win scenarios for collaboration, fostering trust. So the lesson's clear. Emerging economies are increasingly sources of solutions for global health challenges, but realizing this potential requires institutions that help innovators protect their work and form partnerships. And so IP protection functions as this institutional foundation for controlled inclusion, fostering trust, and enabling sharing while maintaining the security that's necessary for complex knowledge transfer. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. And I should note that we now have 77 of those I4H studies from 44 countries, and they're all available online at medium.com/innovate for health. So great. Let me just ask one detailed technical question, because I think it's important for policymakers in Argentina and globally to understand. Can you explain why we have patents and regulatory data protection as different instruments in the life sciences space? What do they do and what do they accomplish?
Great question. So what you're actually asking is, what is the difference between a patent and a trade secret, right? So a patent is a government-enforced monopoly with one limitation. You must disclose publicly everything you know about it, such that a person having ordinary skill in the art could recreate your invention. That is the bargain that is made publicly. So we will allow you to have this monopoly to produce this, but you have to show and tell your work to everyone. A trade secret is totally different. A trade secret is valuable information, and it's only a trade secret so long as it remains secret by definition. It's not something you register with the government. So when you're talking about patent protection, that's the bargain. But on regulatory data protection, what we're talking about is what is the data, the trade secrets that you agglomerate and that you are required to share with the government to get market access. So in the US, I'm talking about the FDA. You know, you have to submit to the FDA clinical trial data and other things. There's similar regulatory processes for agricultural chemicals and things of this nature. So that data under the TRIPS agreement must be protected. So you can't disclose it. The government can't disclose it. In the US, we actually use criminal penalties. So civil servants could go to jail if they disclose that. Other countries have different protections. But the question on regulatory data protection is, what do you do with that data once you have it? So, and the classic scenario here is that the innovative pharmaceutical maker has patent protection and it runs out on a date, and the next day or even before in some systems, a generic competitor can come and submit their biosimilar. They prove that it has the same activity, and it doesn't have to generate any of the data. It doesn't have to do any of the really hard work. And you know, if you look at the data, promulgating your trade secrets, your know-how, often costs more than anything else. Clinical trials are extremely expensive. You know this. So, you know, a lot of pharmaceutical makers and the U.S. as well, our position is it's unfair market use. You should have to do your own homework and provide that information to the regulator. And it's not fair for the regulator to simply hold that and let you ride on the coattails of those who came before you. So that's what regulatory data protection is. It's not forever. Typically, it's for a period of time, and often that's what the U.S. is negotiating in various trade agreements. We're looking at what is the term of exclusivity on that regulatory data.
Y desde el punto de vista comercial, lo importante es que te garantiza volver esa inversión. O sea, ese monopolio garantizado es lo que le da precisamente al que está innovando o invirtiendo la seguridad de que va a tener un retorno de esa inversión. Entonces, hay unas teorías en contra de estos monopolios, pero realmente es la manera de garantizar la inversión en cosas que son totalmente, increíblemente costosas y que no solo en dinero, sino también en tiempo. Entonces, ese monopolio es esencial para garantizar esa protección y esa seguridad de que voy a invertir el dinero, voy a recobrar por lo menos lo invertido. Entonces, ese es el truco también y la importancia desde el punto de vista comercial.
So, one thing I think to be clear about is we often use the term monopoly when we talk about patents. They're actually a property right. We could say, if you own a house or a flat, we could say you have a monopoly on that because that's unique. It's unique, but there are many other houses and flats to buy. Now, perhaps you have a house in a particularly desirable location, and that is unique and special, and therefore it might give you some advantage. And I guess sometimes patents are like that, but that does not make them monopolies. You only have a monopoly if you have market power, if you have something so unique that people want or you control a market. So that's one point. Patents, really like most property rights, are a form of security that lets us make plans, lets us make investments, knowing that we'll get a return, we get the potential of a return that people can't take away from us just by copying. So that's the function they serve. And pharmaceutical innovators depend on that return in order to make these very large investments where they solve problems, many problems. Most drugs fail. Most candidate drugs, over 90% of candidate drugs fail before getting approved. because they're so difficult. So throughout the process of developing a drug, the innovator must solve many problems. And sometimes that means they get several patents as property rights on those inventions that solve those problems, that enable them to get a working drug that is safe and effective. Now, regulatory data protection, there's another way to look at it that's been described. There's a very common practice in countries where after there has been an innovator who goes through the process of filing for approval to market the drug, they first must prove it's safe and effective. They, of course, as we've said, submit data to prove it's safe and effective. And then they start marketing the drug. Sometime later, once the patents expire, a generic company will want to copy the drug. And the way the practice has become over the last 40 years is that the generic company may simply prove that their drug is chemically bioequivalent to the original drug. What that means is the same drug chemically. They don't have to prove that their version is safe or effective. They just show that they've done the same thing as the innovator. Now, what regulatory data protection does is it says that this new privilege that was created about 40 years ago, that there's a waiting period for that privilege. The generic company typically must wait 3 to 5 to 8 years, depending on the government's rules, before they can use that privilege to follow and copy the generic drug. So it's really a waiting period to exercise a privilege. And in fact, if the patents were expired without regulatory data protection, if the patents are expired, they would be free to create their own data, submit their own tests, and prove safety and efficacy and get approval. Nobody does that. That's not the generic industry's business model. They follow on the innovator, and they simply want to prove that their drug is identical so they don't incur the costs of tests to prove their drug is safe and effective. Thank you.
Okay, I want to broaden the conversation beyond intellectual property. You know, when I look at Latin America, and this is a generalization, but I think the two largest problems with Latin America's innovation system, whether in life sciences or in technology more broadly, is a massive lack of underinvestment in R&D. Latin America as a region invests less than half of what Southeast Asian nations do in R&D as a share of GDP. And the second would be very weak industry academia collaboration. You know, if you ask me, what makes the US innovation system different than that of any other country in the world, I would say it's that we have transformed our universities into engines of innovation. From 1996 to 2025, academic technology transfer to startup companies has led to 150,000 patents and 18,000 startup companies. But in Latin America, I see universities that are great in the humanities, but historically weak in technology. So that's point one. Point two, if you look at the new numbers to create a new innovative drug, you often hear the Tufts study, $2.6 billion. J&J just came out with a study saying $4.2 billion is now the average cost to innovate a new drug in America. So question one, what does Latin America need to do most to improve its ability to innovate in the life sciences? And two, if it costs $4 billion to make a new drug, is this even attainable for this region? Why or why not?
Well, I'll just chime in here with one thing that I think is very important. As I was mentioning in the opening remarks, I do think that what we need is, on the one hand, IP education and literacy among our scientists. Number two, a predictable regulatory framework. But those two are also quite essential in order to have investment partners. If we do not have clear rules as to our patent regulation, as to what will be approved as a patent and what will not, it will not be easy to find investment partners who would like to come and invest in R&D here in Argentina. So I do think that building bridges among the universities and investors or companies is really essential. And many of the work being carried out at in the science departments of our universities. I'm thinking specifically just the last 2 weeks we've spent our patent professors, and we've been over at Fundación Instituto Leluar, which is one of our in research institutions, really excellent. And we have been, in fact, talking with them, with the scholars there, about patents. It was really an amazing also sort of joint venture, but how, you know, our IP professionals mixing and chatting and understanding what happens among our scientists. I do think there is a lot of work to be done there in what we can call building these bridges, and therefore also reaching out to investors. This is something that, and investment companies, this is something that personally I think is just a big objective, at least in my career today.
En el caso de República Dominicana, hemos estado implementando diversas estrategias. Como les dije hace un rato, tenemos la agencia gubernamental operativa, de hecho trabaja como un reloj suizo, pero nos percatamos a nivel nación de la falta de educación en cuanto a lo que hablábamos hace un rato, qué es patente, qué es patentable, qué se registra, cómo se debe registrar. Entonces la ONAPI, que es la Oficina Nacional de la Propiedad Intelectual, decidió no solo poner como si fuera para un niño de primer curso, de primaria, todos los manuales, todos los criterios de cómo se hace, cómo se debe hacer, pero también creó toda una unidad que se llama CAMI, que es una unidad de soporte directo a estas personas que quieren innovar y que están en ese proceso. Pero además de esto, como parte de la estrategia de innovación, aparte de los incentivos directos para la inversión en biotecnología y en biomedicina, están también unos incentivos por concepto de investigación precisamente y experimentación. Me puedo deducir hasta el 100% de esos gastos de la renta. Entonces hemos puesto unos incentivos que lo que pasa que estamos, digamos, iniciando. Ya tenemos mucha experiencia en términos de material médico, pero copiamos. No copiamos de counterfeiting, pero sí hacemos ya lo que está hecho. Ahora que estamos innovando y tratando de buscar cosas nuevas, y hay unos emprendimientos nuevos incluso en temas de biotécnica azul, y es el uso del sargazo, una serie de cosas que antes no hubieran ocurrido si no tuviéramos estos incentivos. Entonces, definitivamente la educación es vital porque está todo el ordenamiento jurídico, pero si no sabes utilizarlo y crees que algo que simplemente es tal vez objeto de derecho de autor, que nada tiene que ver con una patente, mucho menos vas a saber qué hacer. Entonces, las universidades están de la mano, algunas de ellas, en lograr alianzas, tal y como tú decías. De hecho, el Estado hizo directamente una alianza con Purdue University para fines de fomentar esta tecnología, este cruce de conocimiento, de modo que podamos tener no solo estos altos profesionales, sino también técnicos, que a veces necesitamos las dos cosas.
So just a couple of
Two-finger, Mark.
short
Two-finger.
points. What's that?
Two-finger comment.
Yeah.
Quick up.
Yeah, well, one is that education of entrepreneurs and scientists and researchers is so important, and it's something that we often, when we look at wealthy economies, we don't often appreciate how much of it's going on at every level. Civil society does it, the national governments do it, regional governments and cities and universities do it. I've been involved in those efforts in a small college town in a bigger city where they teach entrepreneurs about how to form a company, what a patent is, how to get financing, and so on. So that kind of education is important, and I think that kind of capacity building is essential everywhere, and it's, I think, one of those things, you know, invisibly woven through the economy. It doesn't take government subsidies or government intervention or government control. Capacity building is the best investment a government can make, because often once you build the capacity, it repeats itself and grows throughout the industry and the sector, and you don't have to keep investing in it.
Maybe one last question for me, then we can take a question from the audience if anybody has one. Marie, you kind of talked about this notion that maybe has pervaded the global south or Mercosur countries, that the attitude that intellectual property rights are a rapacious form of extraction from either the rich north or the companies of the rich north. Maybe an perspective advocated by an Argentinian, Carlos Correa, which Mark and I spend a lot of our time in the corners of the world trying to push back upon. But my question is, Cairo, maybe for you, have you been to a country in the world where you would say, they have adopted just the completely different perspective to intellectual property rights, embracing it? And can we connect this to any stories of a country that has done so and then has seen a flourishing of technological innovation? And if you don't have an answer, I know Mark does.
That's a great question. It's always dangerous to compare, especially neighbors. So I'll be careful. We are very stakeholder driven at the PTO. So we listen to our stakeholders and we listen to their feedback. What are the pain points for them? And I think we do observe, without going into too many details, differences in foreign direct investment between countries. And we observe that FDI tends to be greater where there are greater IP protections. Now, there's a debate about chicken and egg, which came first. I would argue that innovation absolutely requires, and FDI requires, these strong protections. So if you want to take advantage of opportunities for FDI, and just to highlight, the U.S. still remains the #1 source of foreign direct investment flows into the region. U.S. companies who I talk to every day want to see strong IP protections. So they're telling me constantly, these are our pain points. These are why we're not investing, but we want to. And so we put this all together in the Special 301 report. You can read it online. This is every year published by the U.S. Trade Representative. You can see where countries in the region fall on the list. I can at least say that Uruguay is not on the list. So this is a list of countries where we want to see IP progress. So for, at least from the U.S. perspective, currently Uruguay is seen as having stronger IP protections than perhaps its neighbors. But yeah, I think that if you want to see the U.S. perspective, read the Special 301 report. It really does reflect what our stakeholders are experiencing. And if you want to take advantage of more FDI, that's a great checklist to go through.
I'll just comment that in our Innovate for Health series of studies, a country that really stood out to us is Cameroon in Africa. Cameroon joined the Central African Intellectual Property Organization, introduced a whole slew of new or stronger IP rights, especially in the life sciences sector, and they have subsequently seen a flourishing of biopharmaceutical and medical device innovation in their country, to the point where now Khartoum is kind of recognized as the medical device hub of Africa. So some great stories from that continent to study as well. Okay, I saw one question. Go ahead. Give us Stefano. You've had questions. Stefano, you go ahead. Quick. We're going to take two questions at once. Stefano, Andres.
Just a curiosity. Do you envisage in perspective, some effect of AI on the IP discussion also in the pharmaceutical sector?
Great. Let's combine with Andreas' question. Ask in English.
Yeah. Really quick. Ecuador is like, as you may know, a biodiverse. I'm certain that a lot of cure for diseases are in our venomous frogs and all. Our regulatory framework is based a lot in Andean cosmovision, the protector of biodiversity, and that makes patentability of things for healthcare really difficult in Ecuador. We got this case in which Abbott Laboratories stole 750 frogs from a rainforest to extract this drug that they patented. And how can we build a framework maintaining this cosmovision, because it's part of us too, but allowing to healthcare industry to grow to and investigation to grow to in Ecuador?
I'll let anybody take either of those.
The effect of AI is an interesting one. It's going to be really important. It already is emerging as an important tool in drug discovery. There's so many potential molecules you have to test. It's just expanding the ability to test and discover, and it's a very exciting thing in the future. I don't think it's going to interfere with the IP protection for pharmaceuticals. It's just going to be, it's a particularly great tool because machine learning is fantastic for the kind of things you have to do in drug development. As for the question of biodiversity, this is a pretty complex issue in the global south. A lot of people have a deep belief that there's traditional knowledge and genetic resources that could be a gold mine, but I think it's really the innovative capacity of the people of the global south that is the potential gold mine. Whether a tribe knows that a frog's venom may have a certain effect is interesting, but to actually take that, experiment upon it, synthesize it, consistently, safely make it into a drug is going to cost billions of dollars and take a lot of innovation and investment. And so that is something you need an effective IP system to create the security people need to make those investments.
Very quick question, no comment. Only question.
Sorry, I have two questions, but they're very quick. Everybody in this room know the law of Gordon-Moore. Yeah, that means the doubling of the capacity of the microchip in every 2 years. Now in life science and so on, we have the so-called E-room law, which is the name of Gordon-Moore backwards. That means in every 9 years, the number of patented drugs per 1 billion R&D investment halves. Yeah? It's quite different direction. So in every 9 years, the investment of the R&D less effective. So my question is, what do you think about it first? Second, how you mentioned AI and etc. can help that. Second, I know that the latest figures are showing a little bit different with the law, but it means the ERUM law, but it means rather that the pharma companies rather producing drugs which are very specified. Yeah? And the second is rather to the technology transfer. Economy is about incentives. Yeah? So I would suggest rather to look at around in the world how the technology transfers institutions are doing. Just one example, the YISUM at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, they have the magic formula 40-40-20. Yeah? When the researcher develops something, they say, stop publishing. Yeah? We will maybe try to patenting. After that, profit sharing is 40% goes to the researcher, lovely. 40% goes to the university, and 20%, the revenue, goes to the labor. Yeah? And that is why, the reason why the number of patenting per capita is the highest in Israel.
Okay.
Sir, did you have a very quick question? Rapido pregunta.
Yo sí, entiendo con el señor que efectivamente las patentes son un monopolio. Eso por primera vez lo leí de Rothbard y de Stephen Kinsella, que lo debe conocer, que es un abogado muy importante, muy famoso en Estados Unidos por oponerse a las patentes y a la propiedad del derecho intelectual. Es un tipo de monopolio muy particular, pero es un monopolio, porque si no podríamos pensar que Ford podría haber su invento o su descubrimiento de la cadena de fabricación, mejor dicho, la fabricación en cadena de los automotores, podía patentarlo, pero entonces no podrían haber aparecido ninguna de las otras firmas automotrices que hicieron el mismo procedimiento. Ese es un ejemplo nada más. Es así. ¿Es así o no es así?
Religious dispute among many libertarians.
Es tal un derecho que usted puede renunciar a él, como hizo Marie Curie con está un derecho que usted puede renunciar a él, como hizo Marie Curie con la invención de... que es tanto un derecho, que es un derecho más que un monopolio, que usted puede renunciar a él. De hecho, Marie Curie renunció a registrar la patente de la radiación. Podía haberlo registrado y dijo no, porque su idea era otra. En mi opinión es un derecho. Pero usted dijo de monopolio.
I think it was an issue of translation. No, I did say monopoly. So, of course, I agree that it's a property right, fundamentally, and that's the important piece. And again, this bargain is all about protecting the public domain while maintaining the incentives for innovation. And there's policy differences on, how long these terms should be, what it should look like, but I think there is fundamental agreement that you need both. You need a term of protection to ensure through those property rights that people want to keep investing and innovating, and you need a public domain that allows for everyone to build on it after that. If I could return to your very interesting questions, I come from microprocessor manufacturing, so you got me with Moore's Law. I'm not an expert on what you're talking about, the biotechnology space and the expenses and innovation, but if there is an analog with semiconductors, I think we already have an answer, right? So as the speed and the density of transistors increase, the costs of manufacturing them also increase, and that's your concern. But I would say that hasn't stopped us, right? That hasn't stopped us, and in fact, semiconductor manufacturing continues apace, and I would say that's because innovation is not a zero-sum game, right? We've created new uses and new markets. I mean, several years ago, if you had told me there'd be a massive global rush to do linear scaling on chips, which we call AI chips, I wouldn't have even known what you were talking about. So I'm excited for the use cases that don't yet exist. And that's where I think we have to be careful with governments trying to prescribe what will happen, because we don't know what will happen. What we do know is if we put in place strong protections, people, innovators, will lead the way. And that's, I think, for me, the exciting part.
I would just close with two final thoughts. First, Stefano, as you may know, ITIF has a 50-page report out about the role of artificial intelligence in life sciences innovation, where we walk through every phase from drug discovery to clinical trials. So, but I think that feeds into Zoltan's question. You're right. The Deloitte data shows that R&D productivity for every drug class cohort has fallen consistently for 15 years. Part of that is a result of the fact that we've solved the low-hanging fruit. They've not fixed my hair yet, but you look at cholesterol, hair. I mean, now the things we're trying to tackle in the life sciences industry is pancreatic cancer. It's Alzheimer's. We're trying to tackle biomedical challenges that have never been solved in the history of humanity. So that's one reason why it's getting more expensive to innovate these new drugs. And hopefully artificial intelligence and some of these transformative new technologies will be able to help us change the cost curve on the R&D side, because the other part of the issue is we talk a lot about how much drugs cost. So I think for policymakers, if we can use novel technological tools to decrease the cost of the R&D and the development of the drugs, then we can decrease drug prices without sacrificing the revenues that drug companies have to earn to reinvest in this difficult process of innovation, because the global biopharmaceutical industry is the world's #1 investor in research and development. And if we lose sight of that fact and prevent these companies from earning the revenues they need to innovate, then we're all going to be stuck with less innovation. The choice really isn't lower drug prices or lower drug company profits. It's what are drug prices going to be, and are we going to have the ability to innovate the drugs that future generations will need? So I'll close with that. Thank you for the great questions, and can we give a round of applause to this wonderful panel?